People ask Reddit. Serious, teachers of Reddit, what is that one incident that immediately made you call the cops? Worked in a very large US city school district. So large it had its own in-district child abuse team. Caught a teacher abusing students. It was hard as we knew what was happening but we couldn't confirm it, no evidence to go on. Finally, one of the young students broke down. That was all that was needed. Was able to get that teacher out of a teaching position. Out of 30 kids, about 20 cases were opened. Mainly mental abuse but some physical abuse as well. My dad was abused by his teachers as well in a very large US city school district. It might not be the same one but it's almost the exact same, other than the way everyone found out was when parents were at a PTA meeting and a parent was pissed someone's child kept hitting another, and turns out that's what they told the parents so they wouldn't second guess it. Special ed admin here. I've had to call the police a number of times, but there are two that stand out. A student came in with an iron burn on his upper arm. His skin was actually melted in the shape of an iron. It was devastating. He had a cognitive disability and so did his brother, who did this to him at home the night before. Had a student elope from school, get a lighter from a stranger in a car, then break into the school kitchen, break a bottle of oil, and tried to set the school on fire. Last year a student came to me right before the pandemic shut everything down and showed me the marks from her mom's rings from punching her all over. She had also been kicked out and was sleeping on her uncle's porch. Reported it to the school, they did nothing, child services did nothing, so I finally called the police. The other was one of the worst things I've ever heard in teaching. A student came to me because her mom was using again. Heroin is a real problem in the Midwest, and she was concerned. I reported it but nothing was really done. 2 weeks later her mom let her drug dealer boyfriend rape the student and her 10-year-old sister in exchange for drugs. She came to myself and another teacher on my team and we immediately called the police. I hate people so much. My mother used to teach at this private school for kids who have parents that have issues, particularly drugs or alcohol. One time, before my mom was ready to change schools, a few students were caught in having meth in their backpacks. Police were summoned and it turns out, these students were used as mules for their parents who made meth and distributed for parents who used it. The meth-making parents and meth user parents were arrested, charged with child endangerment and some other charges. I work in special education and most of my child welfare calls have been for domestic violence or drugs. The one that immediately went to 911 was when I was late to work and on the corner of the street that the school was on I saw one of my students getting beat by their father. Not a scolding but full-on slapping and punching while the kid was in the fetal position. The student was taken away from dad, went to live with their grandparents, and is doing great now. I'd been teaching about 6 months when a student asked me if they could speak to me in private, so we borrowed one of the student services quiet rooms. She then disclosed serious sexual abuse that was happening at home. Every member of her immediate family was involved. I immediately followed my institution's procedures and informed student services and my line manager. Less than 30 minutes later, social services arrived to speak with the student and they took her away to a safe location away from the family, who were all arrested and charged that evening. The worst part of all was that she thought it was all her fault. I came very close to quitting after having to deal with the fallout from it all. The fallout was all the legal stuff that happened later on. The family said that the girl was lying, that I was lying, that the university clearly had an agenda, and it all became incredibly unpleasant. They tried to get the law involved, which they did, but the physical evidence was more than enough to stop them dead in the water. Everyone who was in contact with the girl, social services, university, police, had her best interests at heart and treated her exceptionally well. This was almost 20 years ago, and I have touched base with her a couple of times. She had extensive psychological and physical therapy, and she's built a good life for herself. I know I took the right course of action, but it was a hell of a thing to experience as a young lecturer. High schooler was holding himself really weird/stiff in class. Asked a few questions after class. Turned out he had untreated broken ribs from dad pushing him down the stairs. I had a student that would regularly sexually assault females and exhibit violent behavior. After administration failed to do anything about it, I then reported to social services. They did nothing as well. I tried getting the girl's parents to do something, they didn't want to go through the effort. Finally, I just plain called the police. Another student had filmed the last straw incident. which I was happy about, since there was video evidence. I got in tons of trouble for doing it. But I have no regrets. How did you get in trouble? The principal made my life awful after that, just constantly rude and demeaning, I could do nothing right, etc. Even wrote me up for not following procedures. It was ridiculous. I left that school 6 years ago and have been happy at my current school since. I was a special ed teacher, and much of my job was teaching kids how to access the community, so we did a ton of field trips. One student brought his jacket even though it was pretty warm outside. I asked him about it, and he mentioned, like it was the most normal thing in the world, that he always brought it, because his dad punched his brother in the face for not wearing one last time. I was the one who the police were called for. My mother was too lazy to pick me up from school when though we lived nearby. Heaven forbid, she has to stop stuffing her face. They would call and eventually call my nana to get me. They got tired of it and told her if she failed to pick me up one more time, they would call the police and report her for child abandonment. My mother cried and said she would do better. The next day? Yep. She didn't pick me up. So the school called the police. Eventually, I stopped going to school. I was the one who the police were called for. My mother was too lazy to pick me up from school when though we lived nearby. Heaven forbid, she has to stop stuffing her face. They would call and eventually call my nana to get me. They got tired of it and told her if she failed to pick me up one more time, they would call the police and report her for child abandonment. My mother cried and said she would do better. The next day? Yep. She didn't pick me up. So the school called the police. Eventually, I stopped going to school. On my students, never. We had support within the school that helped us with any severe issues. However, a bunch of us teachers were coming back from lunch one day and saw a guy, adult in his 50s or so, sitting on the steps with something sticking out of the backpack. We couldn't be sure, but it looked an awful lot like the butt of a rifle. He shouldn't have been anywhere near the school, he shouldn't have been on the grounds or the steps. We called the police, quietly put the school on internal lockdown and had a conversation with our students about what was going on. We were open and honest with them because we wanted them to feel comfortable reporting anything suspicious to us in the future. A few minutes after we called, a half-dozen police arrived. They didn't put him in cuffs, but they did walk him away and then put him in a car. We have no idea if what we saw was a gun or what, but we weren't taking any risks. The stupidest part of the whole thing, the principal scolded us for calling the police because it wasn't a good look for the school to have the cops outside. Thank you for listening to another B-Town Reddit Stories episode. Hit the subscribe button and check out our channel for more stories. Let us know your opinion about this topic in the comments.